In 1973, 8 completely sane people walked into psychiatric hospitals and told a single lie. They said they heard a voice in their head saying one word, thud. That was it. No other symptoms, no other lies. Just one word, spoken once in an intake interview. All 8 were admitted, diagnosed as seriously mentally ill, and once they were inside, every single one of them told the truth. They said the voice was gone. They acted completely normal. They asked to go home. It took an average of 19 days to get out. One of them stayed almost 2 months. This is the story of what happened when a psychologist decided to test something almost nobody had ever dared to ask. Once you're labeled, can you ever be seen as anything else again? His name was David Rosenhan, a professor at Stanford. And what he discovered didn't just embarrass a few hospitals. It forced psychiatry to rebuild itself from the ground up. Rosenhan recruited 7 other people alongside himself. A psychology graduate student, a pediatrician, a painter, a housewife, people with no history of mental illness at all. The instructions were simple. Show up at a psychiatric hospital's admissions office. Say you're hearing a voice saying empty, hollow, or thud. Nothing else. Answer every other question truthfully. Name, job, relationships, upbringing, all of it real. The moment they were admitted, they were told to act completely normal immediately and never mention the voice again. Every single one of the 8 was diagnosed with a serious psychiatric disorder, most with schizophrenia, and admitted into locked psychiatric wards across 5 different states. Then the real experiment began. Not getting in, getting out. Once inside, the pseudo-patients did nothing unusual. They talked to staff normally. They wrote notes, taking observations for the study, which nurses documented as patient engages in writing behavior, treated as a symptom of their supposed illness. Waiting in line for lunch early was recorded in one chart as evidence of an oral acquisitive nature tied to their diagnosis. Ordinary human behavior filtered through a label that had already been assigned and reframed as pathology. Here's the detail that still unsettles researchers decades later. Hospital staff, doctors, nurses, psychiatrists never caught a single one of the 8 fake patients during their entire stay. But the other patients did. Real psychiatric patients in 3 separate hospitals figured out the pseudo-patients were sane almost immediately. One turned to Rosenhan directly and said, "You're not crazy. You're a journalist or a professor. You're checking up on the hospital." The people meant to have the least insight into reality saw clearly what trained professionals, looking at the exact same behavior, completely missed. Why? Rosenhan's theory was simple and brutal. Once a label is applied, doctors stop observing the person and start confirming the diagnosis. Every action gets reinterpreted to fit what's already been decided. The label wasn't describing reality anymore. It was creating it. All 8 pseudo-patients were eventually released, but not one of them was ever told they were sane. Their official discharge diagnosis every time was schizophrenia, in remission. Not cured, not misdiagnosed. In remission. As if the illness that was never there in the first place had simply gone quiet for now. When Rosenhan published his findings in the journal Science in 1973, the psychiatric community was furious. Hospitals across the country insisted this could never happen at their institution. Their staff, they said, were far too skilled to be fooled like that. So Rosenhan proposed a second study. One specific hospital, confident in their staff, agreed to it publicly. Over the next 3 months, Rosenhan would send more pseudo-patients. The hospital's job was simple. Catch them. Staff rated every incoming patient on how likely they were to be a fake, based on behavior, history, and their read of the person. By the end of 3 months, the hospital had confidently flagged 41 patients as likely imposters. At least one staff member believed 19 of them were fakes with near total certainty. Here's the twist. Rosenhan hadn't sent anyone at all. Every single one of those 41 people was a real, genuinely ill patient. The hospital had spent 3 months learning to doubt the reality of the sickest people in its care and gotten every single judgment wrong in both directions without ever knowing it. Rosenhan's conclusion wasn't that mental illness isn't real. It clearly is. For the people the second hospital turned away in suspicion, it was devastatingly real. His conclusion was something narrower and more disturbing. Psychiatric diagnosis at the time couldn't reliably tell the difference between sanity and insanity inside its own walls, and once a label was attached to a person, almost nothing they did afterward could remove it. The study became one of the most cited papers in the history of psychiatry. It's widely credited as one of the forces that pushed the field to rebuild its diagnostic manual from the ground up throughout the following decade, moving toward more structured, symptom-based criteria specifically because Rosenhan proved how easily a label alone could overwrite everything a person actually did. Decades later, researchers have debated parts of Rosenhan's methods and his exact numbers. Some of the finer details have been questioned since, but the core, unsettling finding has never really gone away. Once people decide who you are, they stop watching what you do and start interpreting everything you do as proof of who they've already decided you must be. It happened to 8 sane people in a locked ward in 1973. And if you think about it honestly, it's probably happened to you, in a smaller, quieter way, at some point in your own life. A reputation that stuck. An old version of you that people still see, no matter how much you've actually changed. The hardest label to remove was never the one a stranger gave you. It was the one everyone around you had already decided was true.